Okay, comrades, I'm going to make a start. I hope this is right. It's 72 years since the Nakba started. I say started because, as I was reminded at a meeting organised by the Palestinian National Committee during Nakba week, it's never ended. Nakba is the Arab word for disaster or catastrophe, and that catastrophe has been a continuing one for the Palestinian people ever since 1948. Under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, there were moments when Labour members, including Palestinians themselves, were able to begin to voice their solidarity with the struggle for justice that had so often been dismissed and silenced within the party structures. Even in those days, these were partial and fumbling gains, as we will explore. Tonight, I am draped in the Palestinian flag I was privileged to wave as a delegate to Labour Party conference in 2018, when for the first time, conference debated and overwhelmingly passed a motion supporting self-determination for the Palestinian people as a whole. I'm hugely privileged to be chairing this meeting tonight on behalf of Socialist Resistance. Before I introduce our amazing speakers, let me just do some housekeeping. If you want to ask a question of the panelists, then please type it into the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. That goes to all the panelists, including me as the chair. That's much easier for us to bring the questions together coherently and fit in as many as possible. Whereas if you put it in the chat, it's much more likely to be missed. We've also arranged that those watching on Facebook can also send us questions, and we'll be integrating them too. On the chat, you're welcome to use that, and that's another button at the bottom of your screen if you're not familiar with it. You're welcome to use it, but we want to make the rules clear. This is a meeting in solidarity with the Palestinian people. That should be the focus of discussion at all levels, including on the chat. No racism of any sort, including anti-Semitism or any other form of discrimination. No personal abuse or bullying will be tolerated. If that happens, the chat will be disabled and those responsible ejected. We hope that won't happen and that we can collectively have a fruitful and productive discussion. We have a panel of 3 excellent speakers, as you probably know: Chris Khamis, Jenny Manson, and Gilbert Achcar. They'll be speaking in reverse order for 10 minutes each. Gilbert Achcar is a Lebanese socialist who has a lifelong involvement in the politics of the Arab world, although he's lived in various European countries for many years. He's currently Professor of Development Studies and International Relations at SOAS in London, and the author of many books, including that most relevant to tonight, The Arabs and the Holocaust. So over to you, Gilbert.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Yeah, well, good evening to all, and thank you for, thanks to Socialist Resistance for organizing this very, I would say, needed kind of discussion. We should have more of such discussions, actually, to try to revert the tide that has been created over the last few years over about these questions that we are discussing this evening. And well, speaking of reversing the tide, I would like to start with this because it has been my feeling for the last few years with this the unraveling of all this dispute in the Labour Party and all that overall the attitude on the side of those defending Palestinian rights and the critiques of Zionism has been too defensive, in my opinion. As if this side was, you know, the one that has to justify or legitimize what it is doing. And I think it's high time to turn the tables on this issue, because and I mean, bring back this discussion where it should be rightly located. Hmm? And I mean, it's not only what is needed is not only to reject this assimilation of the defense of Palestinian rights and the critique of Zionism to anti-Semitism, the classical, very old kind of trick in this debate. But really to turn the tables, because the argument that you get is, well, this is anti-Semitic because this is denying to the Jewish people, for some, or the Israeli people, some others would put it like this, the right to a state. And you are denying this right to the Israelis or the Jews because basically you are, I mean, you have some anti-Semitic perspective. Well, I mean, this is a fantastic reversal of the real discussion, because the fact is that this is based on a denial of the Palestinians' right to self-determination. And if we were to say that there is one people for whom a whole political current denies, and its friends, denies the right to self-determination, it is definitely the Palestinian people. And that's what is at stake here, because the assimilation of a defense of Palestinian rights and a critique of Zionism to anti-Semitism is exactly this. It's a denial of the Palestinian rights. It's a kind of obliteration of the Palestinian from the map. It's only a matter of the Israelis or the Jewish people, between quote marks, and its rights, and the rest is not regarded. And that is what is at the bottom of the critique of Zionism, because what is anti-Zionism? It is, I mean, first of all, of course, it targets a specific brand of Zionism, which is today by far mainstream Zionism. There are forms of Zionism we should always maybe make this precision, but there are some brands of Zionism which were different. Those represented by people like Magnus or Buber or Aham. But these have become completely marginalized historically. We are speaking of mainstream Zionism, the founder of which is Theodor Herzl. And this whole conception, which is a colonialist conception, and the term is used in the state, in the Jewish state, which is the title of the German title of Herzl's book. This is what is at stake. This statist Zionism, which is based on the negation of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination, when it postulates that there is a right to build a Jewish state in Palestine on a land with a people. That means a denial of this people's, actually, it went actually to the extent of denying the existence of this Palestinian people. So that goes even beyond the denial of its right to self-determination. And this is not also any kind of project. It's the project of a Jewish state. That's very clearly how it is put. The state of the Jews in Herzl's original title, a Jewish state in Palestine, which therefore is also a racist project, since it is based on discrimination from the start, by definition. I mean, what can be more racist than a definition of a state on such basis? Now, whatever it is, whether it is Jewish or whatever definition you gave, which is racial or religious, to a state, this is discriminatory, of course, and this is exclusivist, and therefore this falls in the category of all oppressive ideologies. And this is a denial of the rights of the non-Jewish inhabitants of the land, the original inhabitants of the land. And today, this idea of a Jewish state that the Netanyahu government is very much pushing forward in every kind of circumstance, and which has been enshrined in various new legislative gestures in Israel, I mean, is even a denial of the basic rights of the non-Jewish citizens of the Israeli state. We're not only speaking of people who are not involved in that state, but we're even speaking of the denial of the rights of the non-Jewish citizens of the Israeli state, and that is what is at stake in this discussion. It is the Palestinian rights first and above everything that is at the core of the discussion. And when people say they are, I mean, when people, when we are critical of Zionism, and of course you can find people who behind the facade of anti-Zionism hide different perspectives, like anti-Semitic perspectives. You will find this in every kind of political stance. People may be using that stance to advance other views which they wouldn't be able to state openly. But this is not what we're speaking about. We're speaking about the let's say the mainstream critique of Zionism, not some marginal anti-Semitic uses of that. And this mainstream critique of Zionism is a critique of this precisely, of this idea of a state which is restricted to a certain category of people. And in that sense, those who advocate transforming Israel into a state of all its citizens are, in fact, at the very least, non-Zionist, not to say anti-Zionist, because this is a perspective that clashes with the idea of the Jewish state, the state of the Jews, as it is at the core of the Zionist idea. And hence all this mixture of views, like the belief of some that a commitment to Zionism equals an attachment to the safety of the Israeli Jews and the right to live there. Okay, but this is not the same at all. I mean, this is not Zionism. I mean, you don't need to be pro-Zionist to be against any idea of expulsion of the Israeli Jews or the rest. So there is a lot of confusion about all that and all this discussion.
Thank you, Gilbert. Our next panelist is the person speaking tonight who I've known for least long, because I only met Jenny, I think probably at the founding meeting of Jewish Voice for Labour, and I've had the privilege of hearing her speak on many occasions, including sharing many powerful stories of her own family history, as she will do tonight. Jenny's been a member of the Labour Party for many decades, probably more than she cares to count. She was a parliamentary candidate for the party in 1987, and she has been co-chair of Jewish Voice for Labour since its foundation. Over to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you for inviting me. Good evening to everybody. And thank you for Gilbert's speech. I'm going to talk tonight about a particular angle of the Labour Party and anti-Semitism. And bear with me because I need to give you a little bit of a background till I explain what angle I want to talk about. As Terry said, I'm co-chair of Jewish Voice for Labour. We were formed in May 2017, and we now have well over 1,000 members with full, that is Jewish Labour Party members in more than a quarter of constituency Labour parties. It's important I tell you some excerpts from our principles that are relevant for tonight's conversation. Our political priorities are universal human rights and dignity, justice for all, freedom of expression and democracy in the Labour Party. We take inspiration from the long history of Jewish involvement in the socialist and trade union movements and in anti-racist and anti-fascist struggles, including the anti-apartheid and civil rights movements. We stand for rights and justice for Jewish people everywhere and against wrongs and injustice to Palestinians and other oppressed people anywhere. We don't actually refer to Zionism in our statement of principles. As an organisation, we are not anti-Zionist. Some of our members actually describe themselves as Zionists, not many, but some. But they sign up to our principles, and we are all opposed to all forms of racism and to anti-Semitism. Yes, as Terry says, I've actually been a Labour Party member for 50 years. I was a young socialist in Harpenden, that very, very Tory town, it always was, as a teenager, and stayed in the party ever since. And the reason I stayed in when so many people left, I think, because I always felt that we had the Labour voters needed a Labour Party. I was a local councillor and a parliamentary candidate in the 1980s. Throughout my Labour Party history, it's been particularly the policies that smacked of collusion with racism and xenophobia that nearly made me resign. I don't know if you remember, but during the Blair government, asylum seekers were the butt of racism and hatred. Later on, it became the Bulgarians and the Romanians. After the financial crash, it was actually Jeremy Corbyn's stand against cuts, especially when the Parliamentary Labour Party seemed set to reduce welfare benefits, that turned me into a Corbynite. And it was absolutely wonderful to have a shadow cabinet for a while where people spoke what they actually believed in and you sat up and listened. I'm often asked if I've experienced anti-Semitism in all these years in the Labour Party. The answer is I haven't. The closest experience was when, some 30 years ago in my local branch, a non-Jewish member complained about keeping Friday evenings free of Labour Party meetings, but that was shouted down. I don't do social media, so of course I'm saved from seeing some stuff which is pretty nasty there. But of course there's always been anti-Semitism in all parties and in all walks of life. You will remember the attack on Rafe Miliband. And then in the lead up to the 2015 election, the horrible personal attacks on Ed Miliband. They seem to centre around what he looked like. And I think he's rather a looker, but he was considered to have too mobile a mouth, too Jewish a face maybe. This might seem insignificant, but I do think it's worth saying that all of our Jewish antennae are extremely sensitive to anti-Semitism. Of course we are. I did observe anti-Semitism in the revenue. After university, I became a tax inspector, and there were not many Jews in the revenue in those days. And common parlance in offices spoke of Jewish accountants. That meant too clever by half, too ready to stretch the rules. In one talk on tax avoidance, the speaker played contemptuously with the name of a well-known tax barrister, and I was the only Jew in the audience, and I felt very alone. I actually wrote to the head of HR in the revenue in those days, saying that Jewish accountant was anti-Semitic and no officer was allowed to say it anymore. But now I want to get on really to the theme of Jewishness, anti-Semitism and the Labour Party. Jews are not one-dimensional. My parents came from quite distinct Jewish traditions, and being Jewish means many dimensions. There are uncountable views among Jews and have been for hundreds of years. There are divisions between the religious groupings. There are various degrees of secularism. I'm married to a practicing Jew, and although I'm secular, we celebrate Passover at home. So every sort of political view, and this is really important, there's an over 100-year different view on Zionism. Within Judaism, there is every degree of progressive and conservative Zionism, anti-Zionism, and for some, quite a lot of people, a complete indifference to Israel. So 100 years ago, these differences on Zionism were understood and part of the norm of conversation. So, for example, my father, Raphael Salomon, who was born in 1906 into a well-established Jewish family, aged 12, wrote in his diary in January 1919, after tea, Mama read a thing out of the Jewish Chronicle about nationalism by Mr. Zangwill, a well-known name in Zionism. Mama does not want me to read me things which are anti-Zionism because she thinks I'll probably take their side. And Dad goes on to write that this was true because he feared turning out the Arabs. In January 1919, in the meantime, in Zhytomyr, near Kiev in Ukraine, my oldest aunt, Esther Polyanovsky, was discussing with various Jewish friends about Marxism, Bundism, a serious study of Jewish religion, and Zionism. She kept a diary too. Esther decided to become a Zionist, and this was forgotten and not discussed at the time I knew her in England. But her own ideology was none of these things. She wasn't a Zionist, she wasn't an anti-Zionist, she wasn't a religious person. Her ideology was a belief in all of our shared humanity. And the family escaped death in a pogrom early in 1919 because she talked all night to the soldiers who came to kill the household. Later, the family emigrated to Palestine to escape further pogroms, but only when her communist sister, who was non-Zionist, Fania, was talked around. So my parents remained connected to Israel through family ties because my mother's two brothers stayed in Palestine. But I won't forget my father's reaction and shame in 1982 when he heard news of the Sabra Shatila massacre. Dad didn't actually renounce Zionism in an explicit way that day, but he cut himself off emotionally from Israel. He actually took to his bed, he was so unhappy, and he definitely taken to his bed also when he realized the extent of the Holocaust in 1945. In other words, many Jews have experienced the horrors in Israel, like they experience all horrors. So I've not joined Jewish political organizations. Before I joined JCOR, as the Jewish Council for Racial Equality, and Jews for Justice for Palestinians. And I've been misquoted about this, as some of you will know. The reason I joined Jews for Justice for Palestinians in the early 2000s was because at that time, and I'm not comfortable about this now, but at that time I felt more comfortable sharing my escalating misery and disillusionment with Israel in the company of fellow Jews. Now let me come to my point. Into all the wrangling and feuds and laughter and friendship among Jews has marched in heavy boots the Labour Party, some other political parties, the mainstream media, and most commentators convinced that there is a single dimension Jewish community and dissident voices must be silenced. They even seem to consider that us dissident Jews might be anti-Semitic. At the moment, I'm looking at the investigations that the Labour Party is carrying on. And because I'm a support officer for JVL, along with a colleague of mine, Mary Glickman, I sometimes see cases in confidence. Other ones I only hear of anecdotally. I know of at least 25 Labour Party investigations of Jews for anti-Semitism. And many of the allegations, it won't surprise you, relate to arguments on Zionism, those arguments that my father had with his mother, that they were having in Russia, that have been aired among Jews for the last 100 years. Most of those being investigated have had themselves real experience of anti-Semitism. And I've not heard of a single case of a Muslim accused of Islamophobia. Has anybody else heard of one? Or of a Christian accused of anti-Christian bigotry. To some of my colleagues, this experience has resembled an inquisition carried out by non-Jews on dissident Jews. As one colleague has said, heretics are without rights, but they're more dangerous than witches. This isn't a witch hunt, this is an inquisition. Witches may cast spells of dubious efficacy, that's right, but heretics trade in ideas, and ideas can undermine the most carefully obstructed orthodoxies. So, back to today's discussion. I think it's useful we realize what's happening in relation to Jews accused of anti-Semitism, but what we really care about and what we must not be diverted from is the policies that support Palestinian human rights, and to recognize our shared humanity and of course her opposition to all forms of racism, including anti-Semitism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I've just lost you. Okay, so our final speaker, I first met in the mid-1970s when we shared a house together in Manchester. That's not why he's speaking tonight. Chris Khamis was a founder member of the Palestine Solidarity Committee in Britain, and he was also a founder member of Labour Party black sections. And remembering that takes me back to those days in the 1980s with the birth of black sections, which I think was a political anchor for the left in the Labour Party in that political period. It's a political anchor we could have well done with over the last 5 years. And I think one from which we're desperately going to need to learn if we're going to go forward over the next 5 years, as I hope we will. I'm very pleased to give the floor to Chris.
Thank you, Terry. And can I say thanks to Socialist Resistance for organising this and helping publish some of the things that we've written. Also, a big thank you to Jenny, because the letter I'm going to talk about, she helped us tremendously in getting it out. And it's just good to have so many anti-racist comrades from all different backgrounds, all fighting together, and that's what we've got to do. What I want to do is actually start on a bit like Jenny and talk about a personal situation and what it personally means for Palestinians in the Labour Party and around the world, not just in Britain, to see what's going on with this witch hunt around anti-Semitism, rather than an attack on real anti-Semitism, picking on people who take up Zionism and what Zionism is doing. And it's the reason I think that I was invited on was because we wrote during the Labour Party leadership election campaign, we, meaning my two brothers and sister, wrote a letter to the 3 leadership candidates saying that we were getting really, really concerned and feeling very unwelcome in the Labour Party, despite decades of being involved. One of us was a Labour councillor, another one is a ward secretary, and so on. I've been a member since the 1980s, except for a period around the Iraq War, which you could guess. But we were just seeing that when we were watching them, all 3 of them, I mean, it's not just Keir Starmer, although all 3 of them kowtowing to the Board of Deputies' outrageous platform. And then when they were questioned, both by Andrew Marr and by Robert Peston, saying that they agreed that to call Israel a racist state was anti-Semitic. I mean, you know, it was just going beyond boundaries we'd seen before. And it's also that we were seeing more and more an underlying racism against Palestinians in the assumptions in a lot of this debate and the people who are attacking us. And we wanted to bring that out, that we felt there was a lot of anti-Palestinian racism, which was a point that Gilbert was pointing out as well. So what we said in this letter was that we believe that racism, that Israel is a racist state and was a racist state from birth, or to use the horrendous language in the IHRA definition, that it was a racist endeavor. We believe that, and we can evidence it based on our family history. And that was because our father was a Palestinian who was studying over in Britain in 1948. And he went back to try and get back when he heard what was happening in 1948. And he tried to get back in, and to just cut the story shorter, but when he got to Lebanon, and from there he would have moved into Palestine, the area around Nazareth had been taken over by the Haganah and was being made into part of the Israeli state, so he couldn't get in. When he went to the Israeli embassy to say, could he have he had to take up a job in New York. Could he, and he had a British mandate passport. So I'm getting a bit too detailed here, but he had a British mandate passport, which wasn't recognized by the US already. This is 1949, so within a year, they de-recognized any Palestinian recognition. And he asked, could I be given could I be allowed in, and could I be given a passport? And he was told, no, you're a refugee, and was not allowed to go back, see his parents, see all his brothers, sisters, all the relatives, and so on. He was just not allowed in. And he said, I wasn't a refugee. I was studying in Britain with a British Council scholarship. Here's all, didn't matter. And it basically came down to the fact he was Arab. He wasn't Jewish. If he was Jewish from anywhere else in the world, he would have been allowed in. The fact he was born near Nazareth, he lived all his life there until he came to study in Britain, it's irrelevant. He was not Jewish. That is obviously blatantly racist. There's nothing else you could say. It was a racist decision to not allow him in. And we don't have to, in our family history, we don't have to look at quotes from Ben Gurion, who talked about moving the Palestinian Arabs out. We don't have to read Ilan Papa's book, although I'd recommend it to anyone, but to know about the ethnic cleansing. We just know about the racism in our family history. And it's not just a unique example, because the vast majority of Palestinians will tell you that they've had that experience somewhere, something like that, in their family history. And I understand Ghada Karmi might be in the audience, and she's written books about it and how she had to leave and so on. So we just know it in our history that it's racism. And so to be threatened with being told that we're anti-Semitic because we're saying that in our history, our family history, we have been the victims of Israeli racism that was there at birth because they were trying to create and succeeded in creating a majority Jewish state is just an absolute insult. And if I could just get a little bit technical, there's actually a complete internal contradiction in the IHRA definition, because it says, and the people who defend it and attack us, it says, they twist the Stephen Lawrence inquiry thing, where it says that if anybody says from whatever group it is, ethnic group it is, that they think they've been the victim of racism, you need to look into it. They've twisted it to say that if any Jewish person says that they've been a victim of anti-Semitism, that is proven, right? Well, if we then say that us being attacked for being anti-Semitic, which is a slur on all Palestinians, it's saying that these are anti-Semitic because they're saying they've been treated racistly by the Israeli state, then, we were saying that you people who are saying this to us are racist as well. You've got a classic, what's called the Russell's paradox, the sheet of paper that has on one side saying the statement the other side is true, and you turn it over and it says the statement the other side is false. You can't resolve it. It's a complete contradiction. And the only way to resolve it, well, there's two ways to resolve it. One is to abandon the ridiculous IHRA definition. The other thing is to say that no, if we're going to carry on these attacks on people who attack Zionism and say that Israel is a racist state, you have to say that you Palestinians are inferior to Jewish Israelis. Which is a racist statement. So actually implementing this is a racist act. So that's one of the things that we wanted to say. The other thing we wanted to get over, that it was more than just, denying us our rights to freedom of speech and to talk about the Palestinians and to defend our relatives who are continually under attack by this state, because most of my relatives actually succeeded in staying in Israel and didn't go away as refugees. But to say that they were actually insulting and really attacking our deepest held beliefs, because despite the treatment that my father received, he brought us up and always went on about how you have to fight against anti-Semitism and all forms of racism, because the Holocaust, the vicious anti-Semitism of Europe, didn't only murder 6 million Jewish people, and you could go to the pogroms and more deaths and so on, etc. beforehand, but it actually, the secondary victims of it were the Palestinian people, because it was the Holocaust and the pogroms that turned Zionism into the majority movement amongst Jewish people, which hopefully it's now going down a bit. And therefore we have to oppose it if we're consistently. And he did that. He didn't just say that, he acted, because there were a number of cases I could bore you all with about where he's defended co-workers who are Jewish, who are victims of anti-Semitism. But also, we took that to heart, and that became how, and I'm talking about my brothers and sisters as well, and that's why when we got involved in the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, we worked with the others to put in the constitution that the PSC was opposed to anti-Semitism and all forms of racism. And that was important. And all the Palestinian members of PSC at its founding conference were arguing for that and supported it. That's why we were all active members of the Anti-Nazi League, because of the anti-Semitism that was going up then. And I've got to say, I mean, in this letter, we say we don't deny there's anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and even more in wider society, because the number of times quite often we have to take up people who come to us and say, we support the Palestinians, because these Jewish people, they're not to be trusted, or somebody will come and say, the Holocaust wasn't really about 6 million, it was invented. And we've very often had to take up those people and say, that is anti-Semitic, that is not the support we want. In fact, Roland, who's somewhere in the audience there and controlling the technology, can tell you a story where he threw the National Front and I supported an offer when they tried to join a PSC demo. And we went home having it. And that's been our whole history. So to have people turning around when we've been consistently fighting against anti-Semites and taking it up whenever it occurred. I should say that at one point in the last 10 years, the PSC threw out somebody who was a Holocaust denier, and whenever, and in the branch I was in, we took up somebody who was kowtowing with anti-Semites and encouraging it. We've been consistently opposing anti-Semitism. So this is a real disgraceful attack on us. How am I doing time-wise? Sorry. Okay, right. So that's why we wanted to take it up, and now it's becoming more important because they're beginning now the so-called misplaced campaign against anti-Semitism and others are beginning to attack Palestinians as well, and we're expected to more and more attacks on Palestinians as a result of that. But we also wanted to take it up because with these people, because we saw a second thing going on, because we saw the Zionists and the Board of Deputies and all these right-wingers, CIA and so on, were beginning to undermine and attack anti-racism in general. We saw it in the way that Jenny so well explained in attacking all the anti-Zionists or even non-Zionists or mildly Zionists, if you like, Jewish people who were opposing what Israel was doing, that they have been the victims of this anti-Semitism thing far more than genuine anti-Semites. We saw it in the recent attack on Ken Loach and Michael Rosen when they were asked to sponsor something for stand-up, show racism, the red card in football. We saw it when they tried to attack Diane Abbott and Belle Rabiro Adams because they addressed a meeting where there were two people, Jackie Walker and Tony Greenstein, who I've seen are in our audience for being there. I mean, it brought to my mind, I remember speaking in 1982 when the invasion of Lebanon was on, in Brent, CLP, when Ken was had just been appointed as Ken Livingstone, that is, on a joint platform with him. And there were a whole lot of Zionists. And I had a 5-minute speech, which took me 20 minutes to deliver, because every 2 minutes, a Zionist would get up and start heckling and shouting, and we had a very peaceful way of dealing with them and so on. But, am I therefore pro-Zionist? Because there were clearly Zionist people in the audience, unlike the fact that Tony and Jackie are clearly not anti-Semitic and have been witch-hunted out. And the other one I wanted to mention was Mark Wadsworth, who I worked closely with and was really key in Labour Party black sections. And the fact that we see so many black people, and I'm using black as a political term, not BAME or whatever. You see so many in the Parliament at the moment is because the breakthrough was the Labour Party black sections, and people need to acknowledge that. We need to say that. And Mark was key on it. And actually, if I could just go on a little bit longer, you saw an underlying racism when Ruth Smeeth, when they were having a picket was being organised at the hearing for Mark, when there was a picket to support Mark, Ruth Smeeth asked for a lot of support because she was the one who was really victimised when she wasn't going to be thrown out. You know, asked for people to walk down with her because there was the insinuation. They love talking about tropes. These people, the people who are attacking anti-Zionists, and they love talking about tropes. But the hidden trope in that was, oh, you know, there's a picket being organised to support black people, and you know how violent black people can be, and so. You know, this is not picked up, you know, that underlying racism. So that was two reasons, really, why we have to oppose this going on. But there's a third reason, which is that it's actually diverting us and taking up a lot of energy when we try to defend ourselves against these things, from building real solidarity with Palestinian people. Because the Palestinians I'm always saying they're being attacked more and more. And it's true, the attacks go up and up and up. We're talking about, with Trump and his so-called peace plan, supporting the annexation of whole loads of the West Bank. You've got continuing humiliation at checkpoints. You've got shootings going on, still demolitions of houses of Palestinians going on and on and on it's going on. And you had that case, and I want to make a point of this, the case where the Israeli army went and destroyed and confiscated a load of medical material that was being set up in the Jordan Valley to help people who had COVID-19 and generally do health support. Money that had been given by, I think it was the Danish government or the European Union. Anyway, they destroyed all this medical equipment. And I put up a post on Facebook on it because I do risk social media sometimes. And there are a number of people who said, this can't be true. This is unbelievable. And it's why we have to continue again and again explaining the nature of the Israeli state, what is going on. Because under all this anti-Semitic thing, they're covering up like the murders of all the people at the Great March on the Gaza frontier and so on. So we really have to take that up and not be diverted by this from taking up the really urgent solidarity, including supporting the boycott, disinvestment and sanctions campaign, the BDS one. And that is a real thing that we should take up, is to continue fighting that and to fight alongside. And I just want to thank all those anti-Zionist Jewish people, the JVL, sorry, and there's magnificent organizations around the world. If nobody knows the Jewish Voices for Peace in America, you should get onto the stuff that they produce. So keep the solidarity up. Thanks very much. Over to you, Terry.
Thank you so much, Chris. I thought it was appropriate to give Chris extra time. This is a meeting about giving voice to Palestinian people who are so often denied it. So I wasn't going to be the one that did that. So we have got a number of questions that I've received, and I'm going to give the panelists 3 to come back on first, and then I'll take another round. I think one that's worth dealing with at the beginning is about the whole term anti-Semitism and whether people think it's a useful term when it's only used to refer to Jews. Would there be a better term? I certainly know Jews who were not very long ago opposed to using it, but have decided that that's a battle perhaps for another day. And then there are at least 2 questions relating to racism. One is about the treatment of Jewish people of Black African descent inside the State of Israel by the State of Israel. If the panelists could say what they know about that and what they think about that. And then a much more general question about the Labour Party's narrative on race, which is obviously very relevant, for example, to the whole horrors that were unveiled in the recent leaked report. And it's, I think, an outrage that the current leadership seems to be much more interested in how that report got into the press, rather than why racism and misogyny and misuse of our membership subscriptions was happening by people who were employed and paid for by the Labour Party. So, Gilbert, do you have any comments on any of those?
Yes, sure. Well, first about anti-Semitism. This is the term that historically was used for this new form of hatred of the Jews that emerged in late 19th century Europe. And which with scientific pretensions, you know, that was so purportedly scientific racism. And of course, the real target were the Jews, because there were hardly non-Jewish Semites in Europe. Okay, but that was a general method of portraying European Jews as non-Europeans, as people belonging there to the Middle East, where you have those Semites. Yeah, so that's why the term is used essentially for anti-Jewish racism, and it's a waste of time to argue on that. And I mean, it's very common in my part of the world, in the Arab world, among Palestinians, Arabs, and all that, to say, but we are Semites, so we can't be anti-Semite. Well, that's not a very receivable argument, because the discussion is not about Semites, whatever that means. Actually, it's a linguistic concept. It is about anti-Jewish racism. So why waste time on this? While the discussion is clearly about the attitude towards Jews. And as for racism in Israel, it's not only the black African Jews or Jews of black African descent who are targeted or victims of racism. You have racism at every kind of degree in the Israeli state, between European Jews and Oriental Jews, or Mizrahim as they are called, the Jews from the Arab world, the Jews from whatever, from the non-European world, are also targeted, I mean, also victims of discrimination, because when a state is built on a racist view, a racist category, then there are no limitations to this racism. It becomes pervasive in the constitution of the state itself, and that's what we have.
Thank you, Jenny. You need to
I've forgotten the. Am I on now? Yes.
Yeah.
I've forgotten the question about the narrative of race. I'll ask you in a moment. On the word anti-Semitism, it isn't a good word, because what is Semitism? And as you say, it covers either covers lots of races or it doesn't cover any race. I think Gilbert was saying, I'm not sure, but I think I would say it is a battle for another day, however, because there are problems in calling anti-Jew racism, because many of us would say we're no separate race from anybody else. And some people would say it was a religion and not a race. And some of us would say, I don't know what it means. My cousin by marriage was called Jonathan Miller, who some of you all know. And he was hysterically funny on what being a Jew was. I won't tell you what he did about his about circumcision, how he explained himself. But anyway, you know, there's been a lot of jokes in the past about what is a Jew, and I think we have to just live with that word, but we nearly always, at JVL, talk about anti-Semitism and other forms of racism. On the ill treatment of Jews, black Jews, and what was called Arab Jews when I went there, when I was 17, I didn't know that they weren't given full rights. Somebody might know. I don't know that, but there is a very scary hierarchy. There was even in a long time ago when I went before university, there was a hierarchy between the better educated Jews, or what people thought were better educated from Europe, and the other Jews. And that shocked me very much. And particularly what we do know about is the ill treatment of asylum seekers in recent years. I mean, we had a family friend called David Kessler who wrote about, I think they were called the Falashals, the Ethiopian Jews. And there are very bad stories about them, their poverty and lack of work. As I say, I don't know if they've actually got less citizens' right. I'd be rather surprised about that. And I'm afraid I've forgotten what the question about the narrative of race was.
How the Labour Party, what do we do about the way that the Labour Party talks about racism today and doesn't look at anti-black racism?
Yes, well, I maybe I'll let Chris speak on that, but I remember that what Mark Wadsworth was talking about at the press conference for Chakrabarti report, if I remember, was why isn't the Labour Party looking into black racism? And Peter Oborne has recently written a very good article about why the Conservative Party is not looking, the HRC has decided not to investigate Islamophobia. These are real concerns for us. And I mean, my guess, without knowing, but my guess is that if we were to look at anti-black racism in the Labour Party, that would be alarming, and probably in all parties. Yes, so I think there's a hierarchy too often of forms of racism as well.
Thank you, Jenny. Chris?
Okay, sort of to link the first and third question, because Gilbert has dealt with the middle one. I'm not sure if I quite fully understand, but just one point is that we get too hung up sometimes on saying racism is about something biological, because race is not a biological issue. It's a social issue. And so, I mean, I've read stuff about, when there was, they're trying to get a definition of Islamophobia in the Labour Party and so on. And I read some idiotic person who had been in the Tories cabinet, sorry, it was an advisor to the Tories, saying, oh, well, how do you define prejudice against a religion? And the thing about Islamophobia is that it's actually racism, because the people who put things against them, start moaning about these Muslims, really mean these dark-skinned people, and so often, I can give you two examples. I mean, one of the tricks I play when I'm having debates in writing is I wait for somebody to start referring to my co-religionists, meaning Muslims. And my family are actually Christian Palestinians. I'm a born-again atheist, but that's another matter. But are Christian Palestinians. And it just reveals the ignorance, because the mixture of religion and this, that, and the other. And so when it's anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish racism, it's not an interest. It's not an issue of that they don't believe that Christ was the Son of God or some crap like that. It's because they say that category of people has socially been defined as being in charge of all the money and finance and behind it and all that sort of crap, and so on. And it's a social thing. And of course, there's huge diversity amongst Jewish people. And there's another aspect I thought of it. Was I remember in the days when I knew Terry in Manchester, a number of left-wing Jewish people who'd come from very strong Zionist families and had been saying to me, we're rejecting all our Jewish culture and so on. I mean, putting aside that there's different Jewish cultures, but we're rejecting it all because to make this break from Zionism, we had to reject it. And I would say to them, no, you can't change the fact. You can take good and bad things out of whatever your cultural background is and question it and so on. But, there's nothing to be ashamed of your cultural background, and you've got to do that. And that's one of the things that I love about Jewish Voices for Peace and the way that Jewish Voices for Labour are doing it, is that there's no compromise when you read their stuff. There's rabbis involved, etc. They celebrate the various festivals and so on. Great, good, that's how it should be, because they've got nothing to apologise for it. So that might be a different point. Just on the Labour Party's narrative and race, we do have to, what Terry said early on, is start taking up the arguments again. one recent example of ignorance on it was when Keir Starmer made that error and then backtracked of saying that Kashmir was an issue between Pakistan and India and so on, ignoring the fact as a lawyer that actually international law, UN resolution says that there should be a self-determination referendum there. And ignoring the fact that Labour's policy was in support of self-determination for Kashmir. But it was ignorance, his ignorance of how strongly, I mean, I lived in Birmingham for many, many years, which has, I think, the biggest numerical population of Pakistanis origin people in the country. And they're nearly all Kashmiri, and how strong they feel about it. And it's ignoring the Hindu chauvinism of Modi. You see, and this was why we put the second point up about the way that this anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism witch hunt was attacking the anti-racist movement in general, was because he, without even realizing it, because he's not very internationalist, you know, it's a mistake that Corbyn never have made. Without realizing it, he didn't realize that he was supporting the horrendous repression that's going on at the moment in Kashmir, and that's being now spread around the whole of India with their Nationality Act, which is aimed at Muslims and so on. You know, and the fact that our current Home Secretary, Priti Patel, is a supporter. She's a Hindu chauvinist, you know, and that we have had a problem. And I just saw a message of some people who knew him from around Brent and so on. We had an issue of Hindu chauvinists in the Labour Party who were linked with the RSS and so on. And so that's the level of ignorance I wanted to take. And so, and just another aspect of it. And Jenny was right that what Mark was taking up was that Shami Chakrabarty's report was about anti-Semitism and other forms of racism in the Labour Party, and there was nothing said about it in her report. And he was trying to take that up when it was, you know, so it doubly makes a point that I was making earlier. But the other thing is of the ignorance is that in this anti-Semitism debate, there's no levels, you know, you know, one of the things we used to say in the early anti-racist movement in the anti-Semitism in the 70s was that everybody is racist in some way because you've been educated in a racist society. You've picked up loads of, I mean, it's less so than you go back to the, you know, the early 20th century when people like the Webbs, you know, founders of the Fabian Society and so on, were coming out with anti-Semitic stuff. But so it's better than that now. But we've all got certain things, and so we'll all make mistakes at times of anti-Semitic tones and not tropes. Sorry, that we didn't realize had an anti-Semitic dimension. We'll all make, you know, assumptions on race and so on. Even black people do that. You know, and the case that came to mind was when Stella Creasy put out a tweet which had a reference to a stereotypical black image in it. She just didn't realize it. She pulled back in a funny way and apologized for it and said, sorry, I didn't realize, you know, rather than saying, sorry, I'm ignorant, I need to learn more. But she apologized and pulled back from it. Well, that wasn't suspendable, or that was the fact that, you know, people will come out with these things and you need to deal with them in an appropriate way. But when they come out with saying the Holocaust didn't happen, or you know, that Jews are controlling the whole financial world and so on, and all that sort of stuff, or that Israel is a feature of Jewish people in general. Those sort of things are serious. Or when they're attacking Jewish people on the streets, it's even more serious. You know, you take things up in different ways. I don't know if that helps answer the question, but
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to take one more round of questions. And I'm going to try, and I've got one question which isn't pointing us forward, and then a couple of things that I think do. The question, an issue that hasn't been dealt with so far tonight, is the whole role of Christian Zionism in the US, which is very much tied in with the Trump family promoting movement promoting a movement determined to move Jews into the occupied territories in order to meet the conditions for a second coming of Christ. Mike Pence is a Christian Zionist, and so the support for this movement is considerable. It would be good if any of the panelists have any comments on that. I'd be interested to know if any of the other panelists, other than Chris, who already answered the question on Kashmir, have comments to make about that. As he said, it's been a matter of huge controversy and anger, not only amongst Kashmiris, but again in parallel with the debate amongst Zionism, amongst many hundreds of people in Britain and thousands of people from the subcontinent who fought for Kashmiri self-determination and Kashmiri rights all their life. And there are many Indians in Britain who see, including people who are brought up in a Hindu background, who see what Modi is doing as a real threat to civil liberties of all people living in the Indian state. I've got a personal question for Chris, which has also been mentioned by other people, which is, you said you were going to talk about Giuliano. It would be really nice if you quoted his famous statement before we finish. And then I think the final question I want all three panelists to address, which I think is of concern to all of us, is how do we continue to fight to defend the rights of Palestinians in the Labour Party now and oppose false claims of anti-Semitism. So I'll hand back to Gilbert to start.
Oh, well, I mean, I don't have anything special to say about the issue of Kashmir. I signed recently a statement which was circulated by the South Asia Solidarity Group about this issue concerning the attitude within the Labour Party. As far as I understand from Indian friends, this is across the board in the Labour Party. There is somebody, I won't repeat the name because I don't know the case, I don't know the person, but someone who is not at all, who is, let's say, on the Corbyn side, who has been very active in the defense of Modi. So that's very worrying and surprising to hear. But I won't say more about that because I don't know more about that. How to defend Palestinian rights? I mean, I think that the key issue here is to, as I said, first of all, to turn the tables on these accusations of anti-Semitism and all that, and to really attack those who use them as racist themselves, as anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian. Sometimes they are such attitudes are related to Islamophobia, which is again another form of racism, and to focus and concentrate on what I mean on the clear, I mean, on the attack of the Netanyahu government and the defense of Palestinian rights, which are issues on which even those who use this issue of anti-Semitism have very little to say when you get to these real discussions about what Israel is doing, how Israel is continuing step by step the annexation of all the land between the Jordan River and the sea, and now we are on on the threshold of a new formal annexation of something like 20% of the remaining territory that is not officially part of the Israeli state. leaving something like 15% of the mandate, the British mandate, Palestine, something like 15% only of it being left for the so-called Palestinian state, which is even less than a Bantustan. I mean, these are the issues on which the discussion should take place. We shouldn't be distracted by these stupid accusations of anti-Semitism and the rest, and attack really on real politics, what's going on in the real world. Why is the majority of American Jews, for instance, becoming so critical of the Israeli state? I mean, even there, this is basic, there are basic rights involved here, and that's where I think that the focus of the discussion should be.
Thanks so much, Gilbert. Jenny, would you like to respond on those questions?
Thank you. So I think the issue of the Christian Zionists in America, and the point that Gilbert's just made about the actual enormous movement among American Jews. I mean, I've been told that 2 million out of the 6 million Jews in America now would speak openly in their criticism of Israel. That's a very large number. One of the useful things about it actually is to deal with an anti-Semitic trope, if you like. I mean, there is a dangerous line around that American Jews are governing world policy towards Israel. How we resolve the problem that Christian Zionists have this extraordinary belief in the third coming, or is it second coming? I'm sorry, I don't know what to do about it, but I do think it's very important that we follow what listen to what American Jews are saying, not only Jewish Voice for Peace, but it's wider than that, but they are doing a marvelous job. On Kashmir, it's interesting because I think this might be one of the first really issues of principle that Keir Starmer, he hasn't succeeded so far. Clearly, it was a very difficult issue in the general election. And we know that Jeremy Corbyn and the Corbynites, if you like, would realise that we have to stand up morally on some issues. We have to say that Kashmir has the right to be self-governing. We can't be governed by one group telling us that that will stop the voting Labour. You know, it sounds like other sorts of bullying. So I feel that, yes, there are times when you have to take a matter of principle, you have to argue for a matter of principle despite some loss of votes. It's a difficult one. On how do we defend Palestinian rights, there's something quite interesting going on, because Lisa Nandy, for example, and I'm told Keir Starmer will probably take a similar view, is arguing, and Wayne David, I think he's called, who works for Lisa Nandy, are speaking quite strongly against the annexation plan, even talking about sanctions. I think one or other of them signed the early day motion. What these people, I think, are going to learn is what anti-Semitism in the Labour Party was partly a story about. In other words, they are very much attempting, I think, to say that they will listen to that one-dimensional Jewish community. But I don't think that we can completely dismiss their genuine concern, not as much as maybe you'd want, but genuine concern for Palestinian rights. So I think there's going to be a clash. There's going to be a conversation, and we should be interested to know what happens.
Thank you, Jenny. Before I bring Chris in, to close, I just want to make a couple of announcements for comrades who've got, and these have already gone in the chat and will go back in the chat after I finished waffling. For comrades with stamina, there's a meeting at 10 o'clock tonight, our time, because it's being hosted in the US, with comrades from the Spanish state, from the organization Anticapitalistas, about their relationship with Podemos. You can find details of that meeting either on our chat or on the Fourth International Facebook page. And if you haven't already liked that page, I'd encourage you to do that if you use social media, which lets you off the hook, Jenny, because you don't. And then the next one in this series will be 2 weeks from tonight, under the title COVID-19 Changes Everything, an Eco-Socialist View, with speakers Pritam Singh, who's a visiting lecturer at Wolfson College, Oxford, a member of the Green Party and an eco-socialist activist for a very long time, and Alan Thornett from Socialist Resistance, author of many articles and books on eco-socialism and ecological issues over the last decade or so, and there's more details about that in the chat. But I'm going to hand over to Chris to close for tonight. Thank you all for being here, and don't leave before you've heard his final words.
Okay, thank you, Terry. First of all, I don't think anybody answered on Christian Zionists and Mike Pence and all of that, but they are a big danger. I mean, a point I always say when people say, oh, the pro-Israeli lobby is so strong. Actually, the bigger danger in the US, the bigger danger is the Christian Zionists. And actually, I think it shows how clever some of these Zionists are, because the Christian Zionists are actually anti-Semitic, because what they say is that we've got to get Israel, greater Israel, back again, and then the Messiah will come back down again, and anybody who doesn't become a Christian gets fried, killed. So, you know, all these Jewish people who we supported to form the state, etc., and so on, if they don't become Christian, then they've had it. I mean, it's a complete racist nonsense. But the Israeli state knows that that this is very helpful to them at the moment, and it does say something about the Christian anti-Zionists, the Christian different organizations who've been involved, the Quakers, if you like, the Methodists, and a number of others. And there's an organization called Kairos, based in Palestine, are very important in taking this sort of thing up. And they're worth following, you know, whatever your religious beliefs are. It is part of the broad anti-racist unified fight that we need. The other thing to take up is this issue about, and it's been coming up in the chats as well, about the identity politics, and you asked me to say about Giuliano. Giuliano Khamis, I can't remember if it was a cousin of mine. He was the son of Arne Mir, who was originally fought with the Palmach, who were the elite commandos within the Haganah, which was the forerunner of the Israeli army, but then turned against and became an anti-Zionist, and she was a communist as well. And she met Giuliano's father, who was my cousin, Saliba Khamis, who was a very active fighter for Palestinian rights, who was on the Central Committee of the Communist Party there until he got thrown out for being too Arab nationalists. It was a bit more complicated than that. But anyway, Giuliano was, in fact, they had 3 sons. And because their mother was Jewish, they had a right to put down whether they were Jewish or Arab on their identity cards, because another thing that's not so well known, but you have to state what you are on your identity card in Israel, sign of apartheid. You know. There's one clip of him talking about, you know, where was he? Because Giuliano actually got conscripted into the Israeli army because he put Jewish down on his identity card, and then came out and realized and became a strong anti-Zionist and set up the Freedom Theatre of Jenin and worked closely with his mother. And if you want to see a film, get Arna's Children. It's just a beautiful film to do. But he said on this clip, when I asked what is his background, he said, I'm 100% Jewish, I'm 100% Palestinian. You know, and when you think about, I thought, what? How can you be 200%? But when you think about how profound a comment it was, and I've got to admit, when people said, where are you from? I used to simplify it to I'm half Palestinian, half British. I've stopped saying that. I say I'm a British Palestinian, you know, and in fact, I can get more complicated if you want. Because, I mean, what do you say? Well, this hand is, if you take Giuliano, this hand is Jewish, but this hand is Arab. This part, this ear, you know, it's just ridiculous. And it's the ridiculousness of trying to identify people by some biological characteristic. You know, their identity is what they choose to do with their lives. They've got a historical background, a cultural background from many, many sources and so on. And that's what you are, and you choose what you do and so on. And that's why, you know, there's been a bit of the debate in chat. I don't know, I was half following it because it's hard to listen to everything at the same time. But about that identity politics is quite difficult and so on. And the thing is, you have to say that anti-racism, that if you are a victim of racism, it's not an attack on what you perceive yourself to be, etc. It's when you are materially discriminated against or put down because of what society thinks you are, right? So, you know, society might think I'm a Muslim Palestinian, right? And so they'll start attacking me. You know, that's racism. Society might think that an Arab Jew is a European Jewish person. You know, it's the fact that they're being picked on because of some socially identified thing, you know, and your identity is your own business, etc. But it's, if you are being discriminated against and treated unequally because of a perceived background of you, that is racism. That would be my slightly complicated definition. So I think Juliana's work, and what Juliana did was fantastic. It was an inspiration to loads of people. And from that, we come on to the final thing about how do we defend Palestinian rights and take it up, which Gilbert just said so eloquently about, you know, this anti-Semitism witch hunt thing is a bit of a diversion. We've got to focus on the point I was making on solidarity with Palestinians and defending their rights. And in doing that, actually, you're stopping the horrendous anti-Semitic reaction that the Israeli state will create, because that's part of human history. You know, when a group, I mean, so just go on a slight tangent here, but what's not so well known is the anti-German persecution that took place after the Second World War. And it was understandable because so many people had been persecuted by the Nazis and so on, but it didn't justify creating 3 million German refugees. I think 1 million of them died and so on. That was a form of racism, but that's what you get when you have a racist state pushing something and saying that we're superior. And so that's one of the tasks we'll have in the future, is to fight anti-Semitism even more strongly in the future. But for now, the defending Palestinian rights is fighting against racism across the world. And what we have to do is take up again and again, explain what's going on in Israel, educate people, take a deep breath when you see the ignorance that so many people still have, build on the pro-Palestinian understanding of the Palestinian issue in the Labour Party now, and the growing one across the world at the moment. Build on that. And central to it will be the BDS, the Boycott, Disinvestment and Sanctions Movement. And we will be attacked as, you know, oh, that's a racist thing because it's attacking. And the answer to that is so simple. When we boycotted South Africa, was that anti-white? No, of course it wasn't. You know, so when we boycott Israel, it is not. It's supporting the 3 simple demands of the BDS movement, which is the right of return of refugees, equality for Palestinians who are living in Israel, right, and and the end of the occupation. Sorry, you know, and so you know, and the question about whether it's 2 states or 1 state that is anti-racist, etc. You can support it whichever view you have, because it's basically saying that you need anti-racism in the area. And some people say, oh, but if we accept that, that will destroy the Israeli state. Well, because it will be destroying the Jewish nature of the state. Well, my answer is tough shit. You know, are you going to defend a racist state? Because if you say it's exclusively Jewish and we're going to treat people who are not Jewish as second-class citizens, that's racist. It's as simple as that. The arguments are so simple. And we really need to build up the support for the BDS. So if you go away with anything else, it's just keep saying boycott, disinvestment, sanctions, because unless we show solidarity with the Palestinians and end this discrimination and brutal repression that's going on and get a more humane society there, we're not going to have peace in that area. We're not going to have peace in the world. It's as simple as that.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for being here. Hope to see many of you in a fortnight's time. If anybody can manage to play us out with the music again, that would be even better. But I don't know where my files are, so it won't be me.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, everybody there.
Thank you.
Roland and Fred and everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Jenny, for support. Bye.